studies. These ones we are probably dealing with populations or groups and not merely individuals. And the data is you compare it with on the exposure and the outcome is collected. The population can be geographical or non-geographical, meaning that geographical meaning it can be worldwide, and non-geographical you can deal with the district, you can deal with the village. But however, when you're not just dealing with individuals, but you're dealing with the whole population or a group. Let's go to the next slide, please. So ecological studies, they have some problems or challenges. Here, that one thing is the total number of the diseased and exposed is known. However, but the joint distribution of the exposure and the disease within the group may not be known. For example, when you collect samples from different communities or from different countries, you really know that you're dealing with people who are diseased and exposed, to justify the distribution of the disease among the exposed and those ones who are diseased. Another factor is that it may other factors may account for the occurrence of the outcome, may be confounding. Confounding meaning that it may be hidden. You may be dealing with a different factor causing the disease you're trying to research on, yet the disease is really hidden. The real cause is really hidden. So other factors may also show the same linear correlation with the outcome. Here we're looking at relationships. You may find out that the factors you're trying to research on, they may show a relationship, and you may not really come up with a clear conclusion of what you're researching on. So there's also lack of correlation. The lack of correlation does not mean that relationship does not exist. There's also this confusion. Though you're not seeing any relationship in what you're trying to research on, it does not really mean that you're not seeing a clear relationship or a clear comparison what you're trying to research. It does not mean that that relationship does not exist, because as earlier I said that you may be having, yes, you know, you're researching on people are exposed and diseased. However, you don't know the distribution. So when you don't know the distribution, it may be hard for you to determine the cause of the disease you're trying to research on. Let's go to the next slide, please. But it also has some strength and the uses. First, it may be able, it may have first may be able to take the advantage of the previous data collected. When you're trying to try to find out a research about the incidence or prevalence of a disease, you may have an advantage to use the data of the previous person who has ever researched on that particular disease. Also, it can establish the direction and strength of relationship between exposure and outcome. You may easily, in case you are dealing with the samples, maybe you have collected samples from different communities, you can be able to compare the rate of the exposure and the outcome. Let's go to the next slide, please. Looking at cohort studies, also known as the prospective study. Initially, here we are dealing with people who are free from the disease. You deal with the population which has not acquired.
Before you go to the cohort,
yes, please.
Can I say something about an ecological study? You know, when they say that the prevalence of HIV in Uganda is 7%. It means 7 of them have HIV, isn't it? So if I come to your class and I get 100 of you, it means that 7 of you have HIV. If I go to 100 babies, it means that 7 of them have HIV. If I go to a convent and get nuns, 100 nuns, it means that 7 of those nuns have HIV. That's what the prevalence of HIV in Uganda of 7% means. It is not true that when you go to Moroto, out of 100 Karamojong, 7 have HIV. You might find 0 or 1. If you go to Mbarara or Ntungamu, out of 100 people, you might be surprised to find 50 with HIV. So what happens in an ecological study is that an ecological study is that study that is done among populations. And so the interpretation of the findings is for the general population. The unit of analysis is at the population level. So studies done at the population level. For example, now we can say we're taking Uganda as a population. You're taking Kenya as a population, and you're taking Tanzania as a population. So you are comparing the prevalence of HIV in Uganda, the prevalence of HIV in Kenya, prevalence of HIV in Uganda. And the interpretation of those findings is for the general population. We do not, in ecological studies, infer those results to individuals. We shall call that a lie, an ecological fallacy. So our findings remain at population level, such that if we said, like the other time I was giving a lousy example, that a good Muganda woman for marriage is from Masaka. So in a nutshell, we can say that all women in Masaka are good marriage material. So when you go there to that population, you have that thinking that all the women in Masaka are good marriage material. Now, when you marry one Muganda woman from Masaka, you will be wrong to find that, you will be unfortunate to find that she's a hell of a woman. Now you will be wrong to say that, you see, I was deceived that the women in Masaka are right, are good for marriage. It is because in ecological studies, the other interpretation of the good women in Masaka, it is for the entire population. It does not apply to individuals per se. So ecological studies are those studies that are done at the population level, and those results are not generalizable to the population. And so whenever they give like interpretations about tribes, they say, okay, can say, the Karamojong are backward. It is not true. You go to Karamoja and find out. You will be shocked to go to Karamoja and you find things that are so modern that you've never found in any other place again, you know? So those sentiments or statements of in ecological study, the results are for the entire population and not for the individuals. And so the outcomes, the variables, the dependent and independent variables, they are assessed at population level, not at individual level. Okay, we can proceed.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes,
Excuse
please. Yes, please.
There's something I want you to help me out of. Like, if I'm making a research at the level of maybe the country, let's say Uganda, and then I try to bring in kind of comparison with other countries at an international level. Would that be a cross-sectional kind of research, or
Where are you doing the study from?
Huh?
Where are you doing that study from?
Okay, I'm doing it at the level of the entire country. Maybe in Uganda.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm looking at HIV prevalence in Uganda. But if I reach at the point of comparison, if I want to look at the prevalence of HIV in Sudan, Tanzania, and the like, At that point, can I call it an ecological study? Because I have now involved this comparison of these other countries, or it can remain as a cross-sectional study. I don't know whether I brought it out well.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So if you go and collect data, let's say you go to the DHIS2. You go to the DHIS2 and then you get data about Uganda. About the prevalence of HIV in Uganda. DHIS data about Uganda. So you analyze that data at a population level of Uganda. Now that will qualify it to be an ecological study. So now when you are doing comparisons, you're also now going to compare with the same findings from other countries. Say you're getting findings from Tanzania, from USA, from Japan, and you're also comparing the data at a population level in those countries. That qualifies it to be an ecological study.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. We are saying that in cohort studies, we are saying that first of all, we are dealing with population which is free from the disease, and then or individuals free from the disease, not necessarily population. It is classified. Sometimes when you get these individuals, you can have them classified into exposed and those ones who are not, who are non-exposed. These individuals are followed up at some period of time, and what you have to put in mind, they should have the same characteristics. For example, if you are dealing with patients who have, let me say, heart disease, and you try to compare with with the risk of developing high cholesterol levels. So you try to take off that analysis. First of all, they have the same common disease. All of them are having a heart disease. So you can try to analyze your study and try to take off their cholesterol levels and see who is at higher risk and who is not at a higher risk, because they're having the same characteristic that having an hypertensive disease. We can go to the next slide, please. Looking at some consideration, must exclude prevalence cases and those who are not at risk of a specific outcome. So when you are dealing with the participants in our cohort study, the ones who are already diseased, you want to deal with them. You are dealing with the one who is not really having that disease. So another thing you must put in your mind is that you must decide the criteria for detecting the outcome and how frequently exposed and unexposed people should be followed up. As I said that, for example, if you're having patients who are having a common characteristics of having a heart disease, you must really come out with a clear criteria of finding out the outcome. For example, testing their cholesterol levels, and you should really have a time bound for the time for following them up. Another thing, you must decide the length of follow-up to allow the outcome for the presentation. Remember, we are dealing with a population which is exposed and those ones who are not exposed. So we must give in a time lag to come out with a clear outcome. Continue, please. Another thing you have to put in your mind is there are some challenges. We are done with that. Sometimes some cohort members have a subclinical or undetectable disease. For example, now when you may bring in a person into the study, but when this person had just the signs, he was in a clinical stage without showing the signs and symptoms, subclinical stage, and when you introduce him into the study, he shows up with the disease. This may affect your outcome. And also the exposure levels might vary from one time to another. For the time limit of any disease, it may vary. So as you're carrying out this study, you should have this in mind, that your outcome or your results may be disturbed by such factors. Also, the study participants and observation often behave differently and may change their usual behavior. That one is, it was a research done by somebody. In case you should have that in mind, in case you're trying to follow up, some people may have a change in their behavior as you're trying to make your study. So there are some of the advantages of the cohort studies. It can establish a temporally sequence between the exposure and the outcome. So temporally means that you can be able to compare. You compare the cases you're studying within the exposure and the outcome, and the study can the natural history of the disease, can study the natural history of the disease, since you're dealing with you're looking at a population which is already free from the disease, but now you're trying to succumb them to a situation whereby some of them are exposed and some are not exposed to the disease. So you can also investigate multiple outcomes resulting from a specific exposure. You can also study the dose response effect of the outcome on a particular, of the exposure on a particular outcome. Please continue. The most disadvantage of this study, it is expensive, since the people involved in it, they are monitored over a long period of time. It may even take years, and it is also insufficient or rare, insufficient for rare and slow developing disease. For example, as Mr. Gerald brought out an example of COVID-19, it cannot be put under a cohort study because it came in very fast and it went in. It was insufficient of the rare and slow developing disease. No, that's not a clear example. For example, it is very difficult to come out with diseases which are rare in a community, and their rate of spread, it is very slowly, in that to give you to put in a lot of money, since you're monitoring these people is very slow, then it will make you to have a lot of money placed in. We have the prone to the study, so follow-up. Some can, within the period of following up, we can have treatment interruption. People can move out of the study, and and this one may affect your outcome at the end of the day, because you may not end with a sample of the people you started with. So we have detection of the outcome might change due to staff and technical changes. This one may affect your study, because since the study, you're really doing it for some good time, some outcomes may happen due to some technical changes whereby staff may move away, or maybe you may have a staff turnover, people, even your study population, some of them may drop out from the study. I think let me take this opportunity to invite my other colleague to take over on retrospective cohort study. Thank you.
Good morning, class. We are going to look at the retrospective cohort studies. With cohort studies, we have both prospective and retrospective. With prospective, we are following individuals, like in front. Then retrospective, we are going backwards. Yes, it's also called the historical cohort, because we are dealing with history. It identifies a cohort of individuals assembled in the past. And this reconstructs disease outcome experience up to some defined time. we say that we are going to follow this individual for the past 5 years, for example, then we see how the person is progressed. Then it's useful for exposure that work clients. I think for following up, for a good example of these are the individuals that are best followed up. So when we go to the problems of this study, the past accurate and complete information is not available. Remember, one was correct or not. So usually the information we get from there may not be accurate enough. Investigator has no control over the exposure levels and confounders. Confounders relies on information. Like we said, you rely mainly on the history that was corrected by someone else, not you. Outcome data might not be available for a lot of cohort members, might require populations-based registry or other tracing methods. Some people don't keep data. Like they don't keep, has been lost. So when we go to the advantages, relatively inexpensive to conduct, minimum follow-up and manpower costs, low manpower costs. Usually you don't incur a lot of expenses in this. You're just going to go, you get some the records, you review them. You don't need much. One does not need to wait for out. I think we are looking for the exposures. Some are the same as prospective. Okay, this one. Yeah. Then when we go to the case control studies.
Excuse me, person. Excuse me, person.
Yes, please.
I'm wondering whether the John Snow study was it under the retrospective. Can you categorize it under retrospective cohort study?
Derek, I beg your pardon.
I was asking that we look at John Snow's discovery of cholera and how it came about, because the outcome was already there, but going backwards was looking for the risk factors that made those people exposed to cholera. So I was asking, can I categorize under the retrospective cohort study? Because he had the outcome, he just had to go back, look into the history on how these people acquired the cholera. Over to you.
I think we can categorize it under that. Because retrospective is mainly going backwards. We have the outcome and we just want to look for the exposure factors. Maybe anyone can add on that.
Excuse me, person. Hello.
Esther is saying no. Esther, why?
Hello.
Yes, Godfrey, go ahead.
I think
I
Derek,
want to
I think I
differ.
agree with you.
I want to differ here a little bit. So in a cohort study, okay, in a cross-sectional study, we said we don't know both the independent and the dependent variable. We don't know the exposure, we don't know the outcome. So we're looking for all of them at the same time. In cohort studies, we are looking for the outcome. In both cases, it is retrospective or prospective. We do not know the outcome, but we know the exposure. Now, for a prospective cohort, we know the exposure now, and we want to follow these people over time, maybe for 10, 20, 40 years, to see if they will develop the outcome. Let's say, let's take a common example of smoking and lung cancer. We follow our people, exposed and unexposed, those who are smoking and those who are not smoking, and see if they will develop lung cancer after 5, 10, 20, or 30 years. That is a perspective, starting from today going forward. For a retrospective, we know the exposure in the past, but still we don't know the outcome. Let us say that we have a population of people whom we know they were smoking by the year 2000. If we're studying life, for example, those days we're studying about asbestos. We know the people who were sleeping in this house, which had asbestos 20 years ago or 10 years ago. So we know the exposure as of 10 years ago. But still, we do not know the outcome. So we begin to follow those people from the time they were exposed, from the time we not necessarily were exposed, but from the time we want to assess the exposure. Let's say we know that by 2020, by 2000, they were exposed to asbestos, and want to see whether those people who were sleeping in the houses with asbestos developed lung cancer over the years. So we begin to ask them questions. You slept in this house in 2000. Did you develop lung cancer? Either 2005, 10, 15, 20, up to now, or they did not develop. So still, in that retrospective way, we are following and asking them for the development of the outcome. But we are following them starting from the time of exposure in 2000 or 2010, and we're following them up to now. So we reach now in 2022, and we're asking them, so we analyze our data. Along the way from 2000 up to now, how many of our people who were exposed to asbestos developed lung cancer? And how many did not develop lung cancer over that time? That is different from a case control study. In a case control study, we are recruiting members whom we already know the outcome. Those are the cases. We know the outcome. So in a case control study, what we don't know is the exposure. So we ask them questions of whether they were exposed. So now we know, we have our people now who have lung cancer. We're asking them, in the past, were you a smoker? Did you sleep under a house with asbestos? Did you do this? Did you do this? So asking them questions to recall their past. We want to ask for their exposure in the past. So those are three key differences that you must know between a case control, a cohort, and a cross-sectional. Cross-sectional, we don't know the outcome, we don't know the exposure. In a case control, we know the outcome, we don't know the exposure. In a cohort, we know the exposure, we don't know the outcome. I hope I am clear to you members.
I beg your pardon, sir, with those three differences.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would love to inquire one thing, in special to the cohort study. You find that you can enroll participants at the baseline of the study. And supposing now the cohort study is going to run for 3 years. And in the middle of the 3 years, some participants actually fall out from the study. And then how best will those participants now be what applied? Like if you're going to apply your inferences to the other members, because at the beginning you enroll maybe 50 participants, but before the end of the study, you find that some participants fall out, like we term them as now lost to follow up in the study. Then how can the study result be actually very much authentic, yet some participants actually followed before the end of the study?
When we are designing these studies, we also prepare in advance the method of analysis. So in such cohort studies, there's what we call ITT, intention to treat. If you analyze with the intention to treat method, then it means that it is analyzed as randomized. You analyze as you randomized. But those ones without intention to treat, when those ones who drop out, you leave them. But if you analyze with intention to treat, that was your design with intention to treat, you analyze everybody, even those who dropped out. You analyze the data which they have at the point of dropping out. So that one, I think I will teach you that one next which years, like 3 years from now, when you come back for your master's, I will guide you on how to analyze data in cohort studies and cohort studies. But for now, I think we just need to know what they are. Over.
It's okay, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So
Sir.
the group can continue.
Now, like Mr. Ejar has told us, case control studies, we know the outcomes. Those are we have the deceased factor, we have the deceased. Those are the cases. We also have the controls. Those are the non-deceased. We just want to know the exposure factors in case control studies. So usually in case controls, we don't follow up people. We get information. We ask and get information there and then. So when we go to the advantages, it's done over a relatively short time. There is no follow-up, so we don't incur a lot of costs. We do not require large samples, and it's good for rare diseases. Also, the study you can also study multiple risk factors under case controls. Now, under the disadvantages, we look accurate information on risk and confounding factors might be unavailable from records and memories. That's self-explanatory. Cases may recall exposures differently from controls. You ask someone, like, how did that disease come about? Like, they don't remember, or they remember different things. There is also a concept of bias. It's also difficult to obtain representative sample cases and controls. That's bias again. It's difficult to assess the temporal sequence between exposures and the disease. Because I don't care when I'm with my So we are going to look at the interventional studies. Those are the non-observational studies, the experiment. We are going to do trials. So under trials, we have controlled trials. We also have non-controlled trials, but we are going to look more about the controlled trials. Under the controlled trials, that's where we have the randomized trials and the non-randomized trials. Under randomized, that's where we have the single blinded, the blind, the placebo. Sister is going to add more information about this. Then under the non-randomized, that's where we have the quasi-experimental design. So I think, sister, you can continue from here.
Thank you very much, Prosi, and the rest of our colleagues who have so far presented. First of all, randomization is a process by which participants are assigned to receive different treatments. Then clinical trials are research studies performed in people that are aimed at evaluating maybe a medical, surgical, or behavioral intervention. And these are the primary ways that researchers find out if a new treatment, maybe a drug, a diet, or a medical device, like for example, and usually this treatment is more effective and has less harmful side effects than the standard treatments. Here we can take an example of COVID-19 vaccines and another vaccine. It's not given to the general population before trials are carried out. So these are cohort studies in which the investigator manipulates the exposure variable. That's the intervention. Best study design for establishing causal inference. That is clear temporal relationship between exposure and outcome. Then also effect of confounders can be minimized. That is the risk of distorting or masking the effects of a study or disease under study are minimized. So best study design reserved for, can you go back a bit, Rosa? Best study designs reserved for mature research questions that is suitable for testing efficacy of treatment that I've already explained. Next slide, please. So we have the steps for conducting randomized controlled trials. I mean randomized clinical trials. That is, we begin by selecting a sample from a population. And then also we have to seek consent. Just as I've explained, if something new, a foreign body, we cannot just insert it or put it into somebody's body, since it can cause harmful effects. So that's why people have to consent first before these trials are done on them. Then measure baseline variables, including the outcome of interest. Randomize, that is, by randomizing, we eliminate confounders at the beginning of the study. Those are the undesirable, that can mimic the real world. The factors that can mimic the real factors or effects which you are looking for. And then apply interventions and blind the patient plus investigator. That is, it eliminates confounders, that is, eliminate confounders during the course of the study or co-interventions. What do we mean here by blinding? That is the treatment given to the clients or the samples is hidden from, the active ingredients is hidden from, at times from the clients themselves, the samples and the investigations, or even the investigator himself or herself. Follow-up cohorts. In other words, we have to follow up in order to come up with if we are to come up with the genuine or appropriate results, which have less or no side effects. And if there are bad side effects, then we leave out the drug or the vaccine. Then measure outcome variable blindly. This eliminates what? Eliminates measurement. It eliminates bias. For example, if we use our treatments without our clients or the samples knowing what it is all about, they are not able to tell or to run for what, and in the process to get accurate data or accurate results. Next slide, please. Hello. Can we move to the next slide? So under intervention studies, we have single-blinded randomized intervention trial. By this, there is random allocation of treatment, but patient or observer does not know assignment of treatment. Just as I've been explaining, by this, we can take an example of maybe if we get 2 treatments or get one, a glass of empty water or another one, maybe we put ORS and excuse me. In other words, in single in single-blinded randomization, it's only the patient who doesn't know about the treatment is receiving, or our sample population, and the observer is aware about what is taking place. Then we have the double-blinded randomized intervention trial. Here, random allocation of treatment, but patient and observer does not know assignment of treatment. In other words, we pick our samples randomly from the population, and the treatment given is not known to any, or you, the interviewer, the observer, and even the, the person or the patient receiving that treatment. And why do we do all this? Just simply to avoid bias. Then also placebo-controlled, double-blinded, randomized intervention trial. Here, random allocation of treatment, but patient and observer does not know assignment of treatment, but the control arm receive placebo and not active treatment. In other words, here in this under placebo, in other words, in placebo experiments, we don't have any active ingredient there. For example, I talked of a glass, if we put water, a glass of water, and the other, and maybe we put ORS. So, and the client is given in order to come up with accurate results. Another slide, please. So we also have some challenges on these studies. That is, one, blinding is often difficult. For example, under surgical or psychotherapy interventions versus medical treatment. Also, patients or investigators making intelligent guesses. So some people are very sharp enough, can easily tell that there's something mixed, or the other one is plain water, and the other one is maybe a drug mixed or inactive ingredient. Then also unintended crossover. If the intervention is transferable. People in the intervention group might discuss with those in the control group due to curiosity. As human beings, we are always curious. So by doing that, there might be distortion of the of the sample, whereby some can cross over and receive join the other group leave the group of the placebo or vice versa interventions. Then also ethical issues relating to the use of the placebo. We've majority of us, we've learned a lot about ethics, medical ethics, and all that, of which most of these things have to involve what? Consents. Then we have ensuring compliance. So people have to comply with what they're being told to do. As we are carrying out these trials or the experiments in order to come up with the accurate results. So we also have advantages. One of them is can produce the strongest evidence for cause and effect. Then also can be the only possible study design for some research questions. That is studies of new synthetic drugs. In other words, these randomized controlled trials mostly helpful in when we are trying to develop new drugs or to know more about the side effects and less harmful effects before it is being administered to the human population. Next, please. We also have some disadvantages. It is often costly in time and money, since we have to involve, first of all, we have to involve different categories of people as the patients and as the samples. So in the long run, we have to involve the placebos and the whatever in order to blind our patients. So in the long run, it becomes expensive. The costs involved are more. Then many research questions are not suitable for experimental designs ethically, since we have to get consents from most of these people who act as our samples. So it is not really easy for someone like, for example, I think during the discovery of these in trials of COVID vaccines, it was not easy. It's life and death. You don't know whether you will die or whether the vaccine has more side effects or lethal ones. So it's not actually easy to get even the samples, it's like someone is offering his or her life. Then standardized intervention may be different from common practice. Next, please. So that's the end of our discussion as Group 4 members. We thank you, Mr. Jalu, for the direction you've granted us. So we back to you, sir. Thank you.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Members.
There are some questions to the group members from the class, or comments, additions, subtractions.
I have a question.
Yes.
Like on that part of double blind, whereby the one introducing in the drug, let's say if it is a drug, and then even the one who is getting it is not aware. Now, when it comes to finding out the outcome, how do we get to know that this person did not get the drug, was given a placebo, and this one was given the real drug?
The people who randomized are aware. the person who randomized, maybe what we do, we get an independent person or statistician to randomize. And so those ones, either placebo, what they are given code zone numbers. So when I give you a bottle with the code number 11, the person who is giving you don't know whether that number 11 is a placebo. The person in that number 11 is aware that that thing is a placebo or not. So there are people who randomize are aware. So when you're assessing the outcome during the time of analysis, those other people are aware. Okay, so I would suggest that my assessment of the class is that we are not so much in the mood. That's my impression from the very beginning, that I think we are not so much in the mood being a Sunday. Now that we have two more weekends and they're sufficient for us to cover what is remaining, I think we can call the day off now, such that we get we get back on Saturday when we're in full mood of learning. So with that regard, I want to say thank you to this group. Thank you. Sorry